Well, good afternoon and welcome back everyone to our virtual meeting speaker series, part 2. I am Xu Shen, a member of CFA Society San Francisco and also part of our member programming advisory council. In our last part, we learned about camera presence, the difference between speaking in front of the camera comparing to speaking in a room with live audience, what to wear with what background it work best, many tips. Today, we'll focus on storytelling and how to think visually. Many here might have experience using PowerPoint presentation tool or audiovisual aid, but what is the secret of creating the most powerful story by leveraging those tools? We will learn that today from Jill again. Jill Kamlengi spent nearly 2 decades in the broadcast television industry, runs his own video production company, and helped many business and individual to tell their story both online and on television. Before I pass over to Jill, still a few housekeeping items. You'll be mute for the session, and please feel free to raise questions in the Q&A box. You'll also have the chance, just like last time, to unmute yourself and ask questions later in the session. We'll try to address as many questions as possible, and this event will be recorded, which we'll share the replay later. With that, Jill, over to you.
All right, thank you, Zhang. I appreciate it. And welcome back. For those of you that are back for module number 2, thank you so much for joining us. And if you missed that one, and hopefully you got a chance to catch up and watch the replay of that. Really enjoyed sharing on-camera tips with you. We talked about engaging with the camera, that right now my brain tells me that I don't want to do this. I want to look at all of you. I want to see your faces. And instead, I'm having to engage through this camera. So we talked a little about communicating and being able to do that in a more comfortable way and the practice that it takes to be able to do that, because it is, again, not natural. This week, we're going to move to video storytelling. So we'll talk a little bit about that. It's an aid in actually helping you so that you're not stuck on camera the whole time whenever you're doing, whether it's a Zoom presentation or maybe you're appearing again on a podcast, doing something of your own, hosting some sort of video presentation that maybe there isn't a live audience. There's all sorts of formats, but what I'm going to try to do is build the basics out so that when we talk about video storytelling and thinking visually, that you have some of that. A quick background for me is when I was in journalism school, my broadcast teacher was the CBS bureau chief in Dallas, was CBS radio, I should say, bureau chief in Dallas the day Kennedy was shot. So he had this immense background that started in radio, but he also had a foresight to be able to know what was coming up in journalism. They were doing online journalism before really the web and online journalism was a thing. But he also started us off by recording our surroundings, telling stories, almost Edward R. Murrow style, with a Marantz recording unit. And then when we worked our way to video storytelling, we kind of had these building blocks in place of descriptiveness, of being able to tell a story. And then one of the first exercises he had us do was, I want to shoot a story from beginning to end, no sound, and make it sequential, and be able to tell the story just through movement without creating what we would call a jump cut back in the day, meaning someone would still be in frame and then boom, you jump to another shot where they're in frame. Somehow now that's become like, oh, it's an in thing to do a jump cut. But back in the day, it was kind of a no-no in broadcast journalism. So that's just, that was kind of my beginnings of formal storytelling and then video storytelling. So that, let's kind of jump into today's presentation and talk a little bit about video storytelling 101. All right, so again, I was mentioning we need to think visually. What does that mean? Well, as we begin to build out a presentation, as we begin to build out something that we're doing on camera or maybe pre-recorded, I'm also trying to think in terms if you're hiring someone to help you market, or you're producing videos to gain new leads, or you're doing it to engage with an audience and it's pre-recorded. Thinking visually, what kind of things do I have that help me tell the story? Sometimes it's video, sometimes it's a graphic, sometimes it's a picture, whatever it might be, beginning to think about those sorts of things as you build your story. And as I mentioned, storytelling principles, they're largely the same across all platforms when it comes to engaging with people, how you write, how you tell a story. but video just adds a new element. And again, pre-recorded is a little different than something that's live, something like we're doing right now in a Zoom format, or even appearing live on a podcast, live on a TV show, whatever it may be. That's a little bit different. But again, you can bring visual elements with you that will help you tell the story. I always bring this one up. It's one of the go-tos. Many of you know Simon Sinek, maybe not. He's someone big in marketing on Facebook and social media, kind of in the know when it comes to what's going on there. And he created what's called the golden circle. And I talk about this because I think it's a great platform for the next two that we're going to talk about, the next two modules of what are we sharing. And it starts with the outside is what? Messaging about you, your products or services. All right. You're all CFAs for the most part, imagine in here being part of this society. So you all do similar things when it comes to the what. That's why it's the biggest circle. It contains the most people. When you do get down to the how circle, messaging about what you do differently or exceptionally. Okay, now that's a little bit smaller. You might do things just a little bit differently. Your firm or your company may have offer up different products or services, or may do it in a different way, how you onboard, how you connect with clients. So it's a little bit smaller, but the smallest one is the why you do what you do. And so when you think video storytelling, we're not getting to the video element first, but before we get there, thinking of sharing why stories really separates you from other people that do what you do. Now, if you're in a Zoom format and you're with fellow CFAs, it still can be the why. Why am I sharing? Why am I the person up here? Why am I telling whatever I'm sharing with others? And why is it important to me? As you begin to think about that, it gets you more engaged. And when you're more engaged, the audience is more engaged. And again, it separates you because it's a much smaller circle of people doing what you do, why you do it. And it's just that it doesn't fit across all formats again in some of the things we do, but I'm kind of doing that as I'm building this in. My why am I sharing with you? I love storytelling. I love video storytelling, and I'm used to doing it on camera. So I love sharing it. So that's kind of my why in all of this. All right, so let's move on to the actual video and storytelling aspects of things. We start with live storytelling versus pre-recorded storytelling. I mentioned that. So live storytelling is what I'm doing right now, what you would do, whether you're on stage, TED Talk style, in a Zoom meeting, you're doing a presentation, a board meeting, even is live storytelling. Pre-recorded is something that you might see an advertisement or a marketing video or a social media video for the most part, unless it's a Facebook Live or something like that. Even podcasts for the most part. Some of them do them live now. Some are both. So it's live and then they'll have a rebroadcast. But when you're live, you bring in visual elements. You'll see me today bringing in video elements throughout this. And so you can't really time it. You can time it, but it's not the same. You probably have a little more length to your presentation, to your storytelling. You're going to bring in elements. There'll be more of yourself on camera versus something that's pre-recorded. And I'll show you one of those, some of the examples that I do for companies. And that way you're bringing in visual elements. You're kind of thinking, okay, how, if I'm going to tell this story, what are some things, some video that I need to have or record, or elements that I need to look up to bring in, because it's all got to be done beforehand. There's benefits and drawbacks to both, because when you're trying to do a pre-recorded, it gives you the time, you can think through the elements, you can match them directly to what you're saying. We'll talk a little about that later, but there's a little bit of a difference. Now, the elements that stay the same, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I know it's all the rage in Hollywood, right, these days, to start at the end, go back to the beginning, cut back to the middle, and go all over the place. But unless you're Tarantino or you're Lucas or Spielberg, it's really hard if you don't kind of stick to having a beginning, middle, and end to your story. Now, that doesn't mean you go sequential, right? I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. That doesn't necessarily make a story either, but just the generals, whether it's video or sharing something with someone, a beginning, a middle, and an end. I know it's simple, right? It takes us back to our English days, but that's kind of a good thing to follow. Editing is your friend. We can all tell long-winded stories, especially people who are storytellers actually have to work on this one, but editing in post, putting something and cutting down what you're saying, or in a presentation, beginning to think about editing yourself down or editing this pre-recorded video. I tell people if they're going to hire a professional videographer, that think in those terms. What is the edit? What is the final product? How can they help me sound like how I want to sound, but also tell the story I want to tell? And sometimes the best stuff is left on the cutting room floor. I don't know if you've heard that in the industry term, but in journalism and in broadcast TV, you don't get a lot of time. And there's often times where I would get 2, maybe 3 minutes for a story that I would do on the news. And that was considered long. That's like a feature story. So a lot of them, 30 seconds, a minute, and you're trying to cut things down. And I'm not necessarily saying you're always trying to get to that number, but how can you edit and cut down? And then I bring the point of, if it's not really exciting to you, then is it worth sharing on video? And one of my examples is meeting video. I have clients but even in the news, people eating at a country club, and it may look pretty, or a person's presentation. If you're trying to put the presentation of someone else in your presentation, sometimes it loses kind of that translation, if you will. So there might be another way. An example was a client that runs, you'll see a video in a little bit, something called the Oregon Wine Experience. It's run by the Hospital Foundation. And they put on they have a lot of events, but one of them's in the fall for some of their big donors. And they bring in live speakers, and it's great. But at a certain point, when you're trying to tell the story of a live speaker afterwards for someone who wasn't there, it loses a lot of energy. But for example, if you tell that story and you do it in a pre-recorded video, now that's different. That can come through, that can translate. But there's just certain things that sometimes don't translate. And I know I'm using examples that may not fit exactly what you're talking about, but if you're in a presentation and you're talking about a product, or you're talking about something that's going on in your industry, you're asking yourself, okay, if it's not exciting to me, or even if it's exciting to me, how am I going to tell this visually? How am I going to help this? So the subject might be, but how I'm doing it may not be exciting. So how can I maybe add some visuals in that will help me in that manner? So I'm going to play this video. So just real quick background. This was played before a donor's dinner, and they gave me 2 things. The executive director said, I'm going to give you carte blanche in our NICU. So I want you to tell the story of it, and I want you to make people cry. And that's all I got. And so this is kind of what I came up with. I don't know if we have time. I'll play it. And if I have to cut through it, we'll do that, but we'll go for it here.
Keep stuck over there.
Whatever.
We're not just taking care of premature babies, we're taking care of babies that were born at term who for some reason are sick, or something just didn't go quite right. We take care of babies for a couple hours to several months. This is the best job in the world.
It can be intense, but we have wonderful outcomes too. So these babies come back to see us sometimes, and they're amazing. And the parents are amazing, and the love that we get from them too is amazing.
Just watching the amazing development of these babies that are born so early and transform, and their family's involvement, and then being able to send them home in the healthiest state possible has been a treasure in my life.
My job becomes, who is this mom? Who is this dad? Who's their family support system? Who's going to help pick up their child that's at school waiting for them to be picked up? Who's going to talk to dad's employer because he has a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning, but his baby's now in the NICU critically ill? The needs of families are constantly changing.
We had a family from the coast, and we had their son, and a few years later they had their daughter born, and it was over in Crescent City, and the mom called the unit and said that my baby's born and she's not doing real well, and I think she's going to be having to be transported. I was able to call the mom and say, I'm on my way to pick up your baby, and she just said she felt so much relief, and that she already had a connection with us. It was just really poignant because she felt like help is on the way.
I'm actually going to pause it there, and I'll send it to you if you kind of want to see more. But this is what the video likes to do when you pause it. I'm going to stop share for a second. So I want you to think of, kind of take notes, and mentally at the end you can ask a question. But I get that not everything's as easy as telling a story visually when you have sick babies, right? There's just something that grabs you through that screen. But what I tried to do is go in there, and again, I'm trying to think visually. What's going to kind of grab people's attention in the story aspect of it? And also, what can I leave out? If they're telling a story and I don't have something to match, I would leave kind of the nurse up on screen. But if I had something in the video, I didn't want stuff to distract from the story. So what I was putting in there is elements of, you're hearing the sound from in the NICU. I want to take people who are at this dinner and transport them into that environment. And so again, I get that not every story is going to set up that way when you're talking about things on Zoom, but I'm giving an extreme example of trying to bring people into an environment. How can I bring sounds? If it's has to do with money, how can I bring in a sound that maybe kind of drives that home? You can have fun with it too in different ways, but it's thinking visual, thinking things and elements that I add to the story. I was happy because at the end, sound came down, people stood up, it was awesome. And then it was time to donate. And here these people are they're ready. They've seen it, they've felt it, and they were ready to donate. And that was kind of the moment for me, is bringing everyone in there into that place. All right. So some of the things that are also in there is say dog, see dog. I don't know if you've heard this before in storytelling or in video storytelling. It's a journalism rule. If I talk about it, I want to see it. Again, in a pre-recorded format, it's much easier. In a format like this, I'm not always going to have a video or a graphic that's exactly for every sentence. I try to put something up on the screen here that shares it, but if you're going to talk about something and you have a visual to match, that's what you want. That's ideal in video storytelling. Again, say dog, see dog, meaning if I talk about that dog, I want to see it on camera. And if you don't, then it doesn't mean you can't reference it. Again, depending, it's just how am I going to tell that story without that element, or how can I engage people without it? And if you can't match, putting something that on there that doesn't distract. So what do I mean by that? Well, I see people with videos around here all the time. I'm in Central Oregon, and we have Mirror Pond. They created a beer off of it, Deschutes Brewery, and it's gorgeous. I mean, it's just a stunning place. And we also have another couple of places that are visually stunning for drone work. But if it doesn't tell the story of what you have going on, I don't care how great the drone or the shot is. If it doesn't match what you're saying, it just distracts, or it distracts the person in the way that, yes, they're tuned into the shot, but they actually they're not hearing what you're saying because it doesn't fit what you're saying. Again, it's say dog, see dog. So if it doesn't match, then it becomes distracting. And then I talk about editing before, leave it on the editing room floor, just because it's a great shot or it's something fun. As I put together this presentation, there's a lot of stuff that's there, but how do I help the audience that I'm with? And I'm going to talk a lot about audience over the next couple of modules, is how do I connect with them? How do I connect the material with the story that I'm telling with the people? And so if that shot doesn't do that, then leave it out. It's just kind of that simple. And sometimes it feels hard because you're like, oh, but I really like this video. Well, at some point you might find a time to use it. Or I like this graphic. Does it tell the story that you're trying to tell? And if not, leave it out, find it for another time. And if you're doing kind of Facebook, LinkedIn style videos, the latest things and market trends or something like that, you'll always find a time maybe where you do something just on that specific graphic. But if it doesn't fit what you're talking about, it doesn't do you any good to actually have it there in the presentation. All right, so what would your audience like to see? What will keep their imagination? Looks like we have an error on the one here. I'll try to find the video that was in there, but you're probably dealing with a lot with numbers. I can imagine a lot with information that you're trying to present to people. And so what can you do to tell that story? The video is that I was going to show, that's interesting that it's on the air, is from Best Buy. It was an old commercial of theirs where there's a guy at the head of the board meeting and he's just basically droning on, the numbers in March are the same as the numbers in April. And these guys are going to play paper football because they're so bored by it. And my friend and I used to love that because we had professors that we have all been around sometimes where it's like, it's on and it's on. What can you use to break that up and keep their imagination? I get sometimes material that you're going to present to an outsider, and I'm going to talk about outsider versus insider, might be different, and maybe insiders are more into it. But even if they're into numbers, even if they're into the presentation, what can kind of capture their imagination and make that sink in a visual way? I don't know how many of you have seen that presentation before about time management where they use rocks. And the idea being that if you focus on the big things and they show them as these bigger rocks and you put them in first, you can fit a whole lot into a jar. But if you start with the small stuff at the bottom and then you try to add in the bigger rocks in afterwards, it won't fit. And there's a visual for you where you have something that doesn't actually, one wouldn't think would tell the story of time management, but it does. It's a really good visual. It brings it to life more than just like, hey, here's a schedule. Try to stick to it or break it down. It's something that tells that story in a visual way. I think the presentation in general has frozen. Actually, let's see if we share this again. It might give me the video. No, it doesn't want to. Stop share. We're going to keep rolling. I told you in the first one, sometimes you're going to have problems. No matter how many times you practice and you run through things, computers do not like to. All right. So, and I'm going to talk about that right now, not breaking the spell. Sometimes you got to roll with things. Sometimes in a video that's pre-done, you can put things right where you want them. You have lots of time and it all rolls together. And if it doesn't, oh, well, we can kind of play with that. But I had someone in the broadcast business who gave me that with features. It's especially important because you're talking about a little bit of longer format, something like you saw right there in the video that I did about the NICU. Don't break the spell. Continue to put things up there. Continue to move the story along. Right now, I've practiced moving between share mode and camera mode. My video doesn't want to play. No big deal. I'll roll with it. I've practiced. I've done it before, and you just keep rolling with it because when you show up, as we all know, issues come up. Sometimes it runs perfectly smooth. Every video is good. And no matter how many times you practiced it, sometimes just for some reason it doesn't work. But if you're prepared and you're moving along in a presentation and you're storytelling, you can roll with it. But if you're not, and you haven't thought visual and you don't have other things to go to, and we go back to lesson number 1, you're not comfortable on camera, now it's harder, right? But if you're comfortable on camera and then you give yourself some graphics and some elements to tell during a Zoom presentation, then you can roll along. And sometimes, again, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But when you set yourself up and you practice at storytelling, you practice the camera and you practice bringing in these elements, the easier it is. And so I say practice it. And I knew one of these was going to bring it up the example. I was going to have this page and I knew one of the videos, no matter how many times we rolled it, was going to have an issue. And so that's why I wanted to be able to, I was like, well, I can't force this demonstration, but in some ways I know it's going to happen anyway. I've done live news too often to know that things don't always go as planned. So the more you're able to give yourself different elements and not rely on one thing or another, the better the presentation goes and the better the video storytelling goes, the visual storytelling goes. All right. So when I talk about a video, and again, whether it's a presentation or a pre-recorded video, open with something visually strong, something good, but you don't have to force it. I'm going to show you another video example if it wants to work with me here in just a moment, but of something that has, again, visual sound. I understand, again, that we're dealing with material that you might be that doesn't actually always lend itself to amazing or emotional sound, but there are different ways to be able to just think about it And that's what I'm trying to do today, is get you to think in that way. And every once in a while, a nugget of gold might come up where you're like, oh, okay, actually, I think I can tell this story. But when you open with something strong, it grabs people's attention. I try to open up with something strong on camera, my presence. I also would do a video in this kind of format. Sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's just myself, whatever it might be, but something that really kind of sets the mood for what you're trying to do. And again, sometimes it's a piece of video and sometimes it's just yourself or a graphic or some sort of funny joke that's on the screen, whatever it might be. And then you also want to close with something powerful that leads you back to the main point. If any of you have taken a debate class, that's kind of debate 101, when you stay on subject and then close back on subject. I don't think a lot of people do that today, especially when it comes to political debates, but that's what you're supposed to learn in 101, right? Is that you start with a subject and you close on that same subject, bringing it home. And when it's appropriate, you have a call to action. And so I'm saying this, again, I'm trying to help you with marketing kind of video things, or being on a podcast, hosting a podcast, whatever it might be, that if on LinkedIn, have that call to action, something. If you're presenting yourself as an expert in this field, or if you're talking about something new, a new rate, or why someone should think about a CD or versus, traditional stocks, whatever it might be, that you're just like, hey, if you have questions, give me a call, hit me up, send me an email, whatever it is. So you have that kind of call to action. If it's the end of a presentation, you've seen that my call to action is giving a little bit of homework, because that way it connects the people that you're talking to the subject matter, and also kind of drives it home. And in some cases, leads to business. So again, I'm trying to cover as many different ways, because that may not always fit, especially if you're giving a presentation to fellow members in the CFA, or in a business to business format in your own business. That call to action may not be the case, but there's something that you can leave them with, that even within your own firm or business or industry, that you can ask of people to kind of connect them to the material. So we'll see if this next one wants to. But when I talk about opening strong, there's a couple of examples. I'll show you this and I'll let it play. This is called the Pacific Rim Bowl. It's Japan's all-stars coming to a Southern Oregon high school team. And every couple of years, one flies to the other, and they do a football game. And so I was asked to tell the story. And so you'll kind of hear some of the sights and sounds in just the first minute or so. I'll play it for you.
Brandon!
The Pacific. I'm going to pause it right there. So again, the drums you're hearing were from an actual peace ceremony that they did between the two countries, represented by the high schools and local community. So I wanted that underneath. So you have this cultural thing, but then you also have this shared sporting event. So you're hearing the cleats, you're hearing the crowd, you're hearing the pads, you're hearing everything that's going on. And I try to open up, bring that person in there, bring that person onto the field so they get a sense of what it's like to be there. Again, another example, I get it. It's kind of like the layup, if you will, because it offers up those sights and sounds. The drums for the ceremony were perfect. It matches something that has a lot of sound. You may not have that, but hopefully after you've done and you've taken these modules, you'll begin to think that way, and you can think creatively. Go back to the rock example with time. You might be able to think of fun examples. Or if you see someone else who has a fun video that explains what you're kind of trying to explain, then make it your own, or use it in a presentation, whatever it might be. That way, you have that ability to kind of adapt, see other things. You're starting to think visual rather than just think of just the presentation, just get it through it, just the material. So hopefully after the first one, you're thinking about the camera and engaging it. And now you're starting to think visual. How do I hit those people's senses? How do I draw them in, but do it in, again, an appropriate way where it actually fits the material that you're talking about? So questions to answer at the end of this one is, what makes my story compelling? Whatever it is that you're sharing, what makes it compelling? And what visuals do I have, or do I need to tell the story? Because again, you want to begin to think visually. So what, again, back to the why, what makes my story compelling? Why am I sharing what I'm sharing? Even if it's an internal meeting that you're having, what is it that I can present that, and why am I sharing this with people? And what can I do to make sure that it connects with them? Because that's what's so important. We want something out of the end of our visual storytelling, our presentation, whatever it is. We want some sort of action usually out of the people. For me, I want you to walk away feeling more confident when it comes to storytelling on a variety of different formats, platforms, whatever it might be. That's kind of, again, why I'm sharing this sort of thing. So if you can answer those two questions, it's really helpful in beginning to think visual, and write them down. Start to write down, here's some stories I tell, here's some Zoom presentations I do, here's some things that I do, and begin to write down materials that you might be able to use to tell that story. And as you go through it, you might try them. Some might work, they might not, but that's the fun of it, is beginning to grow, is writing that stuff down. I'm going to have more on how you can contact me with questions. We're going to do questions here in just a moment, which I loved last time, and I love that some people sent them. But I just like to present that I do some one-on-one coaching. I do in-person stuff. You're down in the Bay. I have family in the Bay. I can travel down there if necessary. It all depends on what your setup is. I've set up people's lights, their podcasts, I do remote editing for people. So there's all sorts of ways that I can help out depending on what you have going on. I know some people asked me about lighting and gear last time. I'm happy to answer more questions. I have a new web camera I do not like as much as the one I had last week. The one I had last week was pretty nice. I want to try some out during this presentation for that purpose, because I wanted to find things that you could find, not use some of the professional video gear. But the one last week I'd consider on the professional end. You can get it, but this one, not quite. I don't know, maybe you could tell a little bit. I have some of the what I call Shekinah glory going on, like Charlton Heston when he came down from the mountain in the 10 Commandments, which I worked for an ABC station, so we aired every year, this glow on the face. And you're asking about the rings in the eyes. So some webcams have that. I used a couple that it took me 10 seconds. I'm like, nope, this isn't going to work. The one last week was it was more expensive, but I can see why it was more expensive. So I can answer some of that stuff as well. But that's kind of what I do a lot in my one-on-one coaching with people. So we'll answer it up to open it up to questions again. I see some, if you want, in the chat, or to unmute, or if you have thoughts. I know someone shared last time about we were talking about on camera and how to present so that it sounds like you're not reading. I am going to get to that in number 2. One way is to have visual materials with you so that it helps you, because sometimes you can then read when you're on camera. I just did a couple of local political ads, and anything that helps you where that you don't have to be on camera, because anytime you would have to try to memorize stuff, it's harder. I'm going to talk about bullet points and that sort of thing in the next one, about topics and how to stay on topic, and bullet pointing is really good. But this is a step that actually will help you. When you have visuals, it can keep you from being forced to try to just read something on camera. All right, so I'm going to stop talking and see if anyone has some questions. Just go ahead, again, put them in the chat, or like we did last time, just go ahead and unmute yourself. I see Sue has her hand raised. Go for it. Are you allowed? Oh, there you go.
Unmute myself. Yeah. Are there editing tools that would be easy for lay people to use, like in terms of putting in videos and knowing what sounds are going to be good, and visuals and all the cutting and splicing? I mean, it sounds like a wonderful idea, but I can't imagine how I would do it on my own.
I hear you. That's a great question. There's some at-home softwares. I use Adobe Premiere, which obviously is, the suite is crazy to someone, for like a lay person to try to take on, but the video editing actually isn't too bad. There's a few apps. I'll kind of get back to you because they're always changing, and some of them are kind of free and they're great. Like you can just edit something on your iPhone. I'm like iMovie obviously comes with tablets, and it's generally pretty easy. I built that presentation in Google Slides or PowerPoint, and dropping video in there isn't too difficult as long as you saw, the YouTube link didn't like it. It's been working just fine, but for some reason today, sometimes they'll move something. But like in Google Slides, it depends on the presentation that you have or what you're trying to do. If you're trying to edit simple videos, I know Facebook and Instagram, if you're doing like a minute reel, can do some simple editing in there. There's also like, I forget, there's another iPhone app. And if you look them up, I could tell you, but really it's going to be kind of your preference. You can see what's out there and probably do a free preview. And most of them, what you're going to see on your screen is something where like you'll see video up here and then the audio is always at the bottom. So that's just the one thing. You're usually going to see a bar, and that's going to be your video timeline. And then your audio is going to be just kind of down below it. That's how 99% of them work. But there are some free kind of apps out there. Again, depending on what you need. If you're getting complicated, then yeah, it might be a little difficult. So hopefully that answers your question, Sue. Sorry, I don't know the direct ones. I know are a lot of the professional ones. And then the other stuff, people I know just edit kind of on whatever platform is posting it. I don't think LinkedIn lets you do that quite yet, but you could start it on another platform and edit. Any other questions? Regarding visual and visual storytelling, or just in general, if you had a question that you didn't get a chance to answer last week. And I am going to try to bring in some stuff from like things that I've looked up, certified financial advisors. I get that it's hard because again, I'm bringing in elements of storytelling, and I wanted to show that one from Best Buy because I don't think anyone is as bad as the guy that was in that commercial. That's the whole point of the joke. But if you have some, you want to send me a link, we put it there. My email, joe@jcamproductions, is in the chat, my LinkedIn. If you want to send me an example, hey, what do you think of this video? Or what do you think of that? I'd love to be able to answer it specific to your field and format. I get it. I have lots of friends that, accountants, CFAs, and other financial industries. Making that visually fun sometimes can feel probably like maybe a little bit of an uphill climb, especially in a Zoom format, but there might be, again, ways that we can help you out in doing that. Any others before we close up? Yeah, Sue again.
Just along that lines, would you have any examples of some AGMs that you've watched that have been compelling to see? Again, there are some numbers, but there are some visuals that maybe we could look up ourselves, or perhaps somebody could put together, a couple of them for us to take a look at. Because again, we're involved in board and numbers and performance and that sort of thing. What have you seen along the way that you've found quite compelling, or conversely, unbelievably, well, I guess most of them are really unbelievably boring. So forget about those. Just the ones that are good.
So I was going to bring an example. I brought in one from my field in the next module, but I started to try to look. I mean, obviously, Dave Ramsey, right? He has his show, but I was watching others on YouTube. I thought it was interesting. A couple of analysts down in, I think it was like Georgia, were actually showing a Ramsey clip. And then, but they were also, it sounds like their format was like, hey, this may have sounded confusing. Let's break it down for you. Or someone challenged him on his show about a certain thing. Let's talk about it. Theirs was a podcast, but they showed the clip. So they took a clip from someone else, put it into their podcast, and then kind of explained it. So I think that was something I saw was kind of like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So if your thought is like, I might take something from someone else's presentation, but I could also take it and explain it better, maybe. So if there's some sort of graphic or thing that can be pre-built, or you see someone explain something and you're like, wow, I need to break that down, or I don't know, a script gets sent or something comes from a corporate level and you want to help people that maybe you're running a team break that down, being able to play the example or play some sort of video that shows it and then kind of add your own little twist on it. That's one of the ones I saw. I saw someone try to do a day in the life of a financial advisor, which can be interesting, but it was completely boring to me. And he had a great camera and a great setup, but there was just something about it that I was kind of like, click, I'm moving on to the next one. It was someone young, they had good energy on camera, but the style that they did it kind of lost me. I think there was another one I was looking at, short little videos that I think work are something's going on and I'm going to explain it in a minute. So, I mean, even if something's been around for a while, I use the example early on of kind of like, okay, why do I talk about people being on camera first versus like, it's because if you've never saved money, why am I going to get into the details of things? But say like a Roth IRA versus like a traditional IRA, maybe it's been around for a while, but all of a sudden people hear about it. And so it's kind of like, well, what is this thing? And so you could do a quick little visual of drawing it, or have someone in that maybe doesn't know what it is, and then do a quick little thing with them. Be like, okay, what questions would you have? Or like, what might help you tell this story of like the difference, and come up with a couple of key points. Again, I'm trying to think visually and it's hard for me. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be like the sound or whatever it is. It can just be something that's really short and well explained and done well on camera that can be engaging. So hopefully that answers question. Also, in coming up in module 3, I am going to talk about the breaking down of topics, bullet pointing things, and how to stay on topic when you're doing either a presentation or video. So that'll be part 3, and maybe that'll answer a few more questions and try to get specific into your field. Again, maybe in the meantime, I'll try to look up some stuff. If you guys can look up some examples, that would be great. Anything else before we close out?
Cool. And just a gentle remind, the part 3 gonna be next week, same time. And really look forward to welcoming everyone back. Cool. Well,
Right. Thank you, Joe.
if there's no other question, thank you everyone for joining us again. Thank you, Joe, for an amazing job navigating through how to tell our story. With that, I'll see you all next week, hopefully. Take
See you
care.
next week. Take
Bye.
care.